All right, are we great? Perfect. All right, everyone. Hello. How's everyone doing today? Thank you so much for joining us for our career in animal law panel. So we have some very special guests today. But before we get into that, I would just like to take the time to thank some of the folks who helped put this together. So I would like to thank, first of all, Professor Kristen Stilt, who's the faculty director of the Brooks McCormick Jr. Animal Law and Policy Program. I would also like to thank the Animal Law Society as well, which I'm a part of. A few more people, Nirva Patel, who's the executive director of the Brooks McCormick Jr. program, Callie Reddy, our program administrator, Ann Linder, our associate director of policy and research, Kelly McGill, our legislative policy fellow, and Bonnie Nadzum, a writer and editor who's also working in the program. Uh, and last but certainly not least, I would also like to thank Mary Hollingsworth, who is a visiting clinical professor and clinic director of the Animal Law Clinic at Harvard Law School. So my name is Ella. I am the president of the Animal Law Society in a second year at Harvard. And yeah, I just want to get right onto it and waste no time. But before that, I would like to introduce our panelists. So first, just the order that I have on my screen, I have Isabella Nilsson, and then I also have Melissa Alpert, Tené Johnson, and Alysson Gambardella. We are so very lucky to have them join us today. And so without further ado, just launching into the questions. The first one is, and I'll start with you, Isabella, and then I will call in the next person after you all are done. But first things first, where are you from? Where do you work? And how many years have you been practicing? So starting with Isabella.
Hi, Ella. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here. I moved a lot as a kid, but I would proudly claim Cleveland. That's where I went to middle school and high school, and then did undergrad in New York, and then moved to Boston, worked for a year, and then attended Harvard Law, where I actually graduated last year, class of 2024. So I think along with Alysson, we're kind of representing more the early career part of the cohort. And I'm currently working as an Equal Justice Works Fellow at Legal Impact for Chickens, which is a strategic litigation firm that seeks to litigate to benefit farmed animals and farmed animal welfare.
Thank you so much, Isabella. And Melissa, how about you?
Hi, I am originally I'm from New Jersey. I went to Harvard for college and undergrad. I graduated, sorry, and law school, and I graduated law school in 2017. So I've been practicing for 8 years now. Um, I actually did my first 6+ years at law firms, and then I joined now Humane World for Animals, previously Humane Society of the United States. We had a recent name change, but I joined this Humane World in January of last year. So I've been here just over a year.
Thank you so much. All right, Tanae.
Hey, thanks for having us. So my name is Tené. I'm a rising fourth year litigation associate at Latham and Watkins. I'm in the New York office. I grew up in the Middle East, in Oman and then Dubai. But I've been in the States now for a while. I came for uni, so 15 years or so. I was class of 2021 at Columbia, so I'm also, I guess now technically firmly like a mid-level. And I mainly I've been lucky, I've been able to do a lot of animal welfare related pro bono work at the firm. And then technically my practice group is complex commercial litigation. So that's what I focus on.
Thank you so much. And Alysson, please take it away.
I'm Allison, and I'm originally from New York, but I'm currently based in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. I am an associate attorney with the Southern Environmental Law Center, and as Isabella mentioned, we are both very recent grads of HLS, so I am also in my very first year of practice and excited to be here. So thank you for inviting me. Oh, and I'm originally from New York.
Oh, you went on mute. You said you're from New York?
Yeah, I
Okay,
couldn't
we have a
remember if I
nice New
mentioned that.
York. Yeah, no worries, no worries. Thank you all so much. So, would love to know whether you entered law school planning to do this type of work. So, if so, how did knowing that inform your time at law school? If not, how did you discover the animal law field? And what did your path look like while you were in law school? So, I will start with Melissa, and then, um, you know, feel free to jump in if you if you would like to respond. So starting with Melissa, and then we'll go from there.
So I went to law school interested in doing animal welfare, protection, rights, whatever work. I mean, it was the main reason I went to law school because between college and law school, I took a bunch of years off and I had a private sector job. I was really interested in it. It was one of the factors in picking a school when I came to the Harvard Law, like, uh, admitted students weekend. I think that was when I met the former executive director of the ALPP, Chris Green, and learned about sort of like this program that they were about to launch, which was the Animal Law and Policy Program. And it sounded really exciting. And it was why I picked Harvard Law School, because I was excited to be part of that, which means I also took the animal law class. I think they had a wildlife law class at the time. I know now they offer all this other stuff and they offer a clinic. That wasn't around when I went to school, but I did join the food law and policy clinic, because that did sort of have an overlap with my interests, because my particular interest is farm animal welfare. And, so there's a lot of overlap, and I did get to do some cool related work in that clinic. But yeah, so I was very interested in doing animal law. And uh, and it's really tough to find a job right out of law school in animal law. But great for my panelists who were able to get in right away. I was not, and financial reasons, so I ended up going into the private sector. But it was an interest of mine. I had always planned to go back into it, and I'm glad that I got to.
Thank you. And just to add, we now have a reading group called Outlaw Oceans that's on aquaculture and wildlife law is being offered. So yeah, a lot of new stuff for sure. Yeah, anyone else? Who else would like to share whether you entered law school planning to do this type of work? If so, how did that inform your time? And if not, what was your path like? Tanae?
Yeah, I'll jump in on this. So I did know I wanted to do animal law work. I was originally set to be a vet, and my undergraduate degree's in biology, and that was just sort of when I was younger, the intuitive way of like you have to help an animal like with your own hands, and that was the only thing I could comprehend. Also, just being from the Middle East, obviously legal system totally different. Some of the work I do now, like First Amendment work related to animal activism, I never would have even imagined, just because we don't have freedom of speech, so it didn't occur to me. But now I get to do, like I said, a bunch of work pro bono at the firm. And I think going into law school, I knew that that was my plan. And so I was pretty frank with interviewers at firms about, wanting to do that type of work, asking to see other examples of similar, work or cases that they've done, asked them about specific clients, sort of like, who are your pro bono clients? Is the ALDF a client? Is PETA a client? Is the Humane Society a client? Stuff like that. And I also, spoke to people in the animal law world or at animal welfare organizations and asked them what firms have worked with you guys, and what firms do you think would be supportive? So that was sort of the approach that I took. In terms of coursework and stuff, while I was at law school, I was at Columbia, and we did have an animal law course my first year, but by my second year, it had actually been removed for, I think there was just low enrollment. And so it wasn't offered in my second and third years. But the way that I worked around that was I sort of just found ways to make, and it sounds like at Harvard, you guys have all sorts of really like amazing specialized courses, so there's less need for this. But my approach was basically to take seminars that on their face had nothing to do with animal laws, and then I just made everything about animal law. And like, it doesn't matter what the course was, there's going to be an intersection somehow between that subject material and animal law. And so some examples, like for example, I took a mental health law course where we learned about like the parents' patriot power and how that's used to, put people into institutions. And I wrote my paper on whether or not there might be uses for that to protect animals. Or like I took a science in the courts class and was able to write about, judicial recognition of animal sentience, and took a mass incarceration clinic and wrote about the ALDFs. They have like a specialized prosecutor who does neglect and abuse cases, so like wrote about that. So I'm always like very eager to talk, and if anybody wants to email me to talk more about like ways to make their courses and animal courses, I definitely recommend it.
And that would be great. And before the end, I would, if you all are able to, could you include your emails if you're comfortable in the chat? So then, if participants are interested in reaching out, we'll also include it as well afterwards. And then, just to stick with you a little bit longer, Tanae, because I know you're a director at ALDF, and so how does that? What does that look like for you? How were you able to present that to your firm?
Yeah, so it's actually, so before I joined the board, I was able to do pro bono work with the ALDF. I helped with filing an amicus brief in a abuse case in the New York Court of Appeals. And sort of the downside, unfortunately, to joining, well, the only downside to joining the board has been that I can't work. We have like conflicts things. So now that I'm on the board, I can't actually represent them. But no, actually, it was very seamless. I just, we didn't have any conflicts or problems at the firm with me joining. And so that was just like a matter of running it by somebody in compliance. And then that was pretty simple, thankfully.
Okay, thank you. And then Isabella, Equal Justice Works Fellow, you're working at Legal Impact for Chickens now. And I know when you were here, you were heavily involved in the Animal Law Society. So yeah, would love to hear about whether you knew that you were going to do this type of work.
Sure. Yeah. And before I begin, I would just like to celebrate Tane's sort of strategy of custom designing your own curricula, because in a way, I think that kind of allows for a deeper intellectual engagement with what you're learning. There's like a personal quality to it that I think we have such a luxury of riches here at Harvard. But even here, I think there's a real way to learn about animal law in a way that kind of enhances your particular interests. And you can go in more of a farmed animal direction, or you can look at aquaculture, like Ella's mentioned, or think about companion animals. And it's true that as working lawyers, what I've found thus far is that in a way you kind of have to be a jack of all trades, because you're grabbing from all these different areas of law that don't superficially seem as though they might relate. Because animal law is so young and new and kind of a terra incognita, there's actually very few laws proper that apply to animals. So you're kind of taking extant law and retrofitting it. So in a way, I think that kind of patchwork style of learning is actually probably the best way to become good at what we do. Yeah, as for myself, I entered law school knowing I was interested in public interest, but not in particular what. And then I think that I immediately saw the amazing animal law community here. I joined the Animal Law Society, which I know Ella's now co-president of. Chris Green, the amazing Chris Green, was here running the Animal Law and Policy program. And I took many classes with the wonderful Professor Kristen Stilt, who's done amazing work on animal law. And I think it just became rapidly clear to me that here was a hard problem I could engage myself with, that was both difficult to untangle, but felt incredibly morally clear in a way that other issues in which I had interest did not. Our modern industrial farming system just feels like such an intersection of overlapping systems of oppression for the worker, for the animals, even for the consumer. And it felt like so few lawyers had the opportunity to try and improve that system or make it better. And so I knew that I would at least try. And when I articulated the idea of a fellowship project, Equal Justice Works, that sort of syncretically united worker welfare and animal welfare, and tried to look at areas in which those two groups and their needs overlapped and ways in which the law could assist. I was very fortunate that Equal Justice Works and my sponsors were intrigued and decided to support me. And that's the reason that I, as an early career lawyer, was able to work at LIC, which traditionally, as a very small group, we're just 5 at the moment, wouldn't have the funding to take on a first year lawyer otherwise.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. And Allison? And Allison, did you already go? I want to make sure.
No, yeah, good. I
Yeah, you
haven't
did,
gotten.
right. And
I
you're at
won't add to it because I
SCLC.
feel like everybody else had so many great responses already. I will say though,
Yeah.
so I entered law school sort of knowing that this was an area of interest for me, but also generally interested in several different categories of public interest law. So I would encourage people if you are someone who's kind of like, I didn't know entering law school that this was definitely what I wanted to do, but you maybe take a class as you're going along, or you see the clinic on the listings, and you get really excited. Don't be too intimidated by like, oh, like so and so has more experience in this, or maybe I needed to start earlier. I think one of the really great things about HLS is that there's so many incredible resources available to students, and it's never too late to really engage yourself with something that you're interested in and to start trying to work towards a career path in that if that's something that interests you. So that's my one thing I would add.
Thank you so much. And I know you're at SCLC right now. And so in terms of, did you find that there was a nice sort of intersection while doing your work? You did hit on that. But what did that look like in terms of choosing that path, even though you're still dealing with animal law issues, for sure, but would love to know how you narrowed it and chose that path.
So I was really interested in doing wildlife law, and the wildlife law course was actually part of what drew me to HLS. So right now I do a lot of work with the wildlife law program at SELC, and it is challenging to find early career opportunities in this field. So I think I'm just very, very lucky that my interests happen to align with sort of what they were looking for in an associate attorney, and just very excited to be where I am.
Thank you. Thank you all. And so our next question is about sort of choosing between the nonprofit or private practice realms. So I know we have a nice mix here. So if we could start with Tené, and could you walk us through, you hit on it, touched on it a little bit, but could you walk us through a little bit more in terms of what made you choose private practice um, in order to, while still doing this work pro bono, as opposed to going the more PI route when it comes to animal law work?
Yeah, so I think, I mean, there are such pros and cons of being, I think, in like in private interest or sorry, like at a private firm or in big law. For me, like I really wanted the training, and I kind of had this feeling, which I don't know if this is necessarily the truth, but there's obviously such a pipeline into big law straight out of school that it's sort of like if I want to take this opportunity, I can't necessarily, go somewhere else and then maybe jump into it 10 years in. So I wanted to take the opportunity while I had it. I think I set myself up very strategically in terms of choosing a firm and also just decisions that I made about like lifestyle and while I was still in school so that I would have, a lot of flexibility. And I think that I've been happy with that choice. It was funny, there was actually a panel like this at Columbia, and there was a couple of people, I think, from firms who talked about being able to do this type of work. So it's been for me, it's been a good choice. I think there are a lot of ways being at a firm that you can, how do I say it? That you can sort of like set yourself up for maximum success if you want to be able to do a lot of animal law work. I would say some of my like top tips or things that I've found so far are just knowing, because this actually varies from firm to firm a good bit, knowing who your firm's clients are and how that's going to affect the type of work that you can do. So I know that my firm, we do represent some factory farm clients. And so I don't want to go, to our pro bono counsel on a regular basis and be proposing work that I know is going to be conflicted out. But I've found, and I think this is generally true across firms, although there are some firms that do like food, animal, or like factory farm reform type work. For my firm, things related to like roadside zoos, those are going to be a lot easier to get approved. Things related to companion animals, neglect and abuse, those types of things. So I think that's one thing to keep in mind for sure, just as you go about looking for like approval. And then also just setting yourself up, I think, as you go from school to, and I'm sure we'll touch on this more, but as you start your career, I have lots of tips about just how to get those clients and get that pro bono work set up.
Thank you. Thank you. Isabella, do you have any thoughts?
Just that I think it's really wonderful to hear about this partnership between, private interest and public interest. And as an Equal Justice Works sponsor, as an Equal Justice Works fellow, I'm partially sponsored by California Change Lawyers, but my other sponsor is anonymous. But that's not usual. Among most of the fellows, they're actually sponsored by corporations or often large firms. I wouldn't be surprised if Latham and Watkins had sponsored a fellow. And so that kind of corporate support and buy-in, I think, is incredibly vital, especially for a new, younger civil rights movement like animal law.
Thank you so much. And Melissa, I know you touched on going into private practice or going to the firm side of things, private firms. So please, what are your thoughts on this and what factored into that decision for you?
I would echo a lot of what Tené said because I also, luckily in my private sector life, I did get to take on some animal cases. I will say the first firm I went to, I thought it would be easier to add an animal kind of case to the pro bono list than it was. It was not. So it was a priority when I was looking at the next firm to see if they had any animal related pro bono cases going on. And it was definitely a big factor in why I picked the firm I did. When I moved. It was not the reason I left the first firm. I moved to Pittsburgh, so then I found a firm in Pittsburgh, and among the firms in Pittsburgh, the one I went to had some active animal pro bono cases for ALDF, and so I was excited to be able to join that as part of being at a law firm. Of course, you're at a law firm, so your pro bono cases are only a small percentage of your total caseload, and I would love to have been able to do a full-time animal practice at my law firm, but that wasn't possible. But it was great that I got some experience doing that because it was a great way to demonstrate my interest when I did apply to animal groups sort of after I left. It was also a great way to meet people at those animal groups, which is always helpful if you're applying to those animal groups. But it was nice to. It was a nice way to keep the law firm life feel a little bit more meaningful. So, but I agree that there are some firms where you will not be able to do it, and there will probably be a strong limitation in what kind of cases you can take on because of the conflicts. Many of the cases that I took on were roadside type cases, although I did a mix. So it's definitely something worth looking at. You can, go to the firm's website. They usually list their pro bono cases and take a look at, and see if they have any animal related cases. You can ask them. You can do some Google searching, but definitely something to consider. If you go into a law firm, you are not doomed to being a law firm forever. You can definitely exit into the public interest sphere later.
And I would actually jump in on and add, they have wildly different pro bono policies. So definitely if you're looking at firms, dig deep, because I've seen firms that have like 50 hours, Latham, I have to say, I'm like so grateful to be there because we have an unlimited, there's no cap on pro bono in terms of like it counting towards your hours for your bonus and all of that. But there are firms that have really strict on paper policies, and then there are firms that have like seemingly very lax policies, but if you ask around, it's like, oh, you're going to get a phone call after 40 hours or something like that. So definitely recommend looking into that. And I think a tip on this that I've found helpful is if you want to spend a good amount of your time doing pro bono, you really should think about it from the firm's perspective. So like, what are the reasons why a law firm would let somebody do pro bono? Like, number one is going to be training, and you're going to be doing like a case where you're going to do things that you wouldn't normally be able to do for a paying client. So sort of I get the feeling that it's a little bit harder for associates to justify pro bono when, let's say, they're doing like valuable work, but something that isn't necessarily a great learning experience to do repeatedly. So like one thing that comes to mind is like a transgender name change petition. Like you're going to learn a lot the first couple times you do it, and then after that, it's like essentially paperwork. So a firm is going to have a very different feeling about somebody doing like 100 of those in a year versus filing a complaint and taking a case like, from the start. So keep in mind, like, why is the firm letting you do this? And then also I think firms allow associates to do pro bono for, press. So thinking about like what types of things can you, after a case is done, go to the PR team and encourage them to put something on LinkedIn, or put like those types of things that sort of make the reciprocal relationship work, can help, I think, if you want to, be at a firm and get to do pro bono work like that.
Thank you. And Alysson, did you have any thoughts on this subject?
I am all good. I feel like I am excited to be working in public interest straight out of law school, but I also appreciate the many different pathways to being able to do public interest work. So I think it's great that we have knowledgeable panelists on that topic.
Okay, thank you all. So this next question, we're going to start with Isabella, since you know many students are curious about the fellowship application process. So would love to hear some advice on, or first of all, would love to hear about what the process was like for you, and as well as any advice you might have for anyone interested in pursuing that path.
Sure. I can only speak from my own experience, but I actually think that one of the most difficult hurdles was actually a kind of emotional one. If you choose to apply for fellowships and even go the public interest route generally, it usually puts you on a different timeline than your classmates that are going into private interest. They usually have already obtained their offers and they know where they're going to be after graduating. And so the entirety of 3L year, in a sense, is more relaxing and restful for them. Whereas if you choose to kind of go into public interest, 3L year, your final year of law school, is actually when you're applying, you're sending out fellowship applications. That process starts in as early as July or August, and sometimes it won't end until April, and you may be graduating in May. And I think for a community of people that perhaps tend to veer on the sort of overprepared, neurotic kind of type A end of the spectrum, it can feel frightening to essentially put your ultimate career on the back burner and have to go through this, I would say, not overly difficult, but kind of onerous process of sending out continual fellowship applications. I think that what the amazing Judy Murciano at the Harvard Fellowship Office told me that I found really helpful is everyone ends up where they're meant to be. And even if you have a moment where you feel sort of hopeless, especially at a well-funded institution like Harvard, but I think at law schools generally, there are people that have been doing this for a long time, and their role is to help you. And if you just trust in them and trust in the process, you will end up where you're meant to be, I think, generally. For me personally, I had a lot of rejected fellowship applications before ultimately I had a single interview with Equal Justice Works where they said, we have one specific sponsor that's really interested in this work. And that's how I ended up being able to work at Lick kind of out of the blue. So I think I have less advice on the logistical side. I think in that direction, I would just encourage you to really be in touch early and reach out to the fellowships office early. But just on the emotional side, I would try and like take a deep breath and reassure yourself that you're doing everything you need to do and that the process in all likelihood is going to end up well for you, and to just do your best to try and tolerate that uncertainty, because I think it's a wonderful life lesson to carry with you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. So transitioning to your work. And starting with Alysson, could you walk us through a typical day or week on the job?
I struggle with that a little bit, honestly, because I feel like there isn't a day that's just sort of typical. I think it really depends on what you're working on in the moment. So I think in the fall, I had sort of more cases that were going through active summary judgment briefing, or like, okay, like here's this permit application that's going through, and we're submitting comments on that, and our deadline is X, Y, and Z. And then in January, February, it's been more like, oh, we're looking into possibly getting involved in X, Y, and Z, and here's some of the research questions that we need to figure out in order to do that, or take a look at how this particular law is being applied in this circumstance. So I think it's hard to zero in on a typical day, but it is always exciting. And I think I've gotten the opportunity to work on a lot of different phases of cases. So whether that's the comment stage or summary judgment briefing, complaints, and then also sort of those early inquiry phases of knowing that there's a problem you want to address, but then trying to figure out how to use the law to go about it. So always fun, but never one kind of day.
Thank you. Thank you. And you're in North Carolina, right? Yeah. Thank you. So how about Melissa?
I mean, I would echo that it definitely varies. Like right now, I'm working on a constitutional defense kind of case of some law that we have gotten passed that's being challenged that is related to farm animal confinement, right? So these days, I have a lot more research and writing and briefing, um, especially as I approach a deadline. But it can really vary. So I'm a staff attorney, which means that you know, uh, so I'm working on litigation, but I'm also advising our internal clients. So if you work at an animal nonprofit, you'll probably have some mix of like I'm advising the client versus I'm like doing the litigation itself. So you'll have a mix of like meetings and different kinds of discussions. Also, let's say you are coming up with a new case, then you'll be sort of like strategizing and researching and looking into the facts about developing that case. So um, there's like really, it's one of the nice things about being a litigator is that you are never bored and you're always learning something. So, uh, so yeah, it really depends. These days, a lot of Westlaw. I know that when I was in law school, I was like, well, I never want to look at Westlaw again, and now I'm looking at a lot of Westlaw, but sometimes it's unavoidable.
Uh-oh, Lexus might be angry with the Animal Law Society after this. Thanks so much, Melissa. Tanae, how about you?
Yeah, so I mean, like Melissa and Allison said, it totally changes. I've I think I've maybe with the exception of a few like weeks or months, always had just one or maybe at sometimes two, but for the most part, one animal related case. Like I mentioned earlier, my practice group is complex commercial litigation, but I also work on some securities cases, which I've been trying lately, and then I've worked on a couple copyright cases. But in terms of my animal related work. So I've had times when I actually just had like a major shift. I was working on, this is all public now, a case for PETA that was a First Amendment lawsuit that we brought in the District of Wyoming. PETA tried to run a pro-vegan anti-leather ad at an airport. It was rejected. And then after issuing public records requests, we found some pretty obvious evidence of viewpoint discrimination. And so that case, for example, it took up maybe about a third or so of my time for the last, it was a total of like 2.5 years, just because it took a very long time to find local counsel in Wyoming who would touch this case. Actually, that took 9 months. But a plug for networking, I was able to find somebody at an animal law conference actually who knew somebody who recommended somebody's wife and whatever. But yeah, so I've had times when, an entire day is drafting a complaint or preparing for mediation or something like that related to one of my animal cases. And then I've had periods when maybe I want to do something a little bit more like on my schedule. And then that's like a really great time to offer to write like an amicus brief or something like that for a group, because then you can kind of draft it, like plug it in wherever you have time, depending on what your caseload is like. But yeah, no typical day. Honestly, at this point, no typical year. I really don't know what's in store for me. We'll find out.
And I catch exactly where you're going, and yes, would agree, would agree, would agree. So Isabella, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, that's amazing to hear about PETA. That's a huge win. So we definitely should celebrate that in this room. Yeah, I'd echo everyone that my days are different. I think there's a solid bedrock of legal research and writing. Um, some of what Lick does can be kind of creative or innovative. So often you're kind of really engaging with the law in a sort of exciting, creative way. And that's something I really enjoy. Currently, I'm preparing for an oral argument I'm going to give next week. So that is kind of a different skill set. And then some of what I do has more to do with fact finding or reviewing evidence. So that might involve reviewing undercover footage, or it might involve reading through FOIAs that we've requested. And that can be a lot more emotionally difficult, but it tends to be less cognitively demanding. So usually in any given workday, I try and forefront the most cognitively demanding tasks, for instance, legal writing. And then maybe later in the afternoon, I'll do the stuff that requires a little bit less cognitive energy. For instance, paging through thousands of pages of FOIA requests looking for, specific phrases or instances.
Well, thank you all. Thank you so much. It sounds like you all have such a uh, rich experience at your jobs. Also, again, not a typical day, which could make for things to be very interesting, while at the same time, and keeping you on your toes, while at the same time, and offering a nice challenge. Um, while at the same time, there are very difficult issues, specifically with regards to animals that you all deal with. So, thank you all so much for the work that you do. Um, I would love to hear a little bit about the culture of your workplace. And so, would love to hear now if it's remote. Also, I know that that's also a unique culture, so please feel free to share. But starting with Melissa, can you share a little about the culture of your workplace?
First of all, we are remote. I mean, we have an office, but I don't think it's super common for people to go in. But that's a change. So that is, in fact, that change was one of the reasons why I could apply to the Humane Society, because I wasn't living in uh, DC anymore. It's DC based, and I got really excited when I saw that they were doing remote listings. And I think post COVID, probably many of these groups or all of these groups are are remote too. So it's a very collegial environment. I actually interned at the Humane Society when I was at HLS, and the person who oversaw my project when I was an intern is now my direct boss. So she was there the whole time, and so it feels very familiar. And it's kind of nice that because it's remote, I do have like a background of knowing her in person. So it makes it feel a little bit less discombobulated. But I know that's like a unique situation. But I will echo what Tené said about the training that you get at a law firm, because I can contrast my law firm experience and my experience in a humane world. And when I was at the law firm, I had like, 5 levels of review above me. So I would do a project, I would do research, I would do whatever my assignment was, but then I would have like a third year over me, and then a fifth year over them, and then a partner over them. And so if I messed something up, like I was going to get feedback. And if I had a question, I had like people I could go to constantly. So I felt a little bit more handholdy. And now, these nonprofits are much smaller. There's like a much flatter structure. There's like a few people on a team. So it's much more independent to be at a nonprofit. I'm not no one's like looking through and like correcting all my little typos and stuff. Whereas I definitely had that experience at the law firm more. So it's nice that you're a little more independent, but if I didn't have my law firm experience, I could see how I'd be a little bit intimidated by, wait, like I'm just running with this? Yes. um, but I'm curious to hear what the recent grads think about their experience, because like I said, I didn't go in straight through. So, I have that background to give me a little bit more confidence. So I'm curious to hear about what they experience.
Thank you, Melissa. And Isabella, I know Lick's culture is so unique, from my own personal experience interning. So I would love to hear from you.
Yeah, I think it might be the least law firm ever in the sense that it was founded fairly recently by our founder, Lena Nello. There's only 5 of us. Our third lawyer just came on this week. And so it's very much got that kind of early startup vibe, which I really love. I agree that sometimes that independence and autonomy can be a little daunting, but I really like that I'm given a lot of trust and autonomy. There's kind of a Wild West element, and you have your hands in a lot of pots. And so I'm always very, everything I do is very rewarding and also demanding. We're fully remote, but we use this online platform called Gather, which, if you've ever played like Pokemon or Animal Crossing, it's a little bit like that. Like, you get to design your little virtual avatar, your virtual desk. And if you walk up to a coworker, it starts a video call with them. So actually it's a wonderful platform. It gives you the feeling of being in an office, even though it's virtual. And then we meet up for yearly or biannual retreats. And we're encouraged to attend as many, conferences as we can as well. So upcoming here in Los Angeles in May is I think it's the Animal and Vegan Advocacy Conference, and I think we'll all be attending that. We attended the Animal Law Conference in Portland this year, and so those are really nice opportunities to see each other and kind of bond in person. But I love, working from my living room. It's great.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And Alysson?
So I really, really love my workplace. It's very collegial and very not intimidating to ask questions at all. So that's really, really nice. I just feel like everyone I work with is extremely approachable. We are 3 days in office and 2 days remote, which I weirdly like because I feel like I'm the type of person where I like asking questions in person. It just feels like a little bit less intimidating somehow. But in general, just an overwhelming amount of support and friendliness from everyone I work with. Everybody's been super welcoming and always easy to ask questions and stuff. So very much appreciate it. There is a level of independence, I suppose, but I feel like I definitely have supervisors who have given me really, really great feedback, and that's been helpful as an early career attorney as well. So generally, great things all around.
It's great to hear. Thank you. And Tené.
Yeah, so I'm at Latham. I was a 1L summer. I split my second summer. So at this point, I've already been in some way like at the firm for, gosh, like 6, 7 years. I don't, I mean, I love it's a very like, firms definitely have cultures and like vibes. And Latham is like a very fun, and I think I picked the best one, like in terms of I feel really happy with being at Latham. I know there are some firms that are a little bit more like formal or a little bit more, serious, or they just have different vibes. In terms of the work that I've done, the pro bono work that I've done, I think for me, I was really lucky in that there was a partner I worked with as a 1L summer, who first day back as a 2L summer reached out to him, started working with him, first day back as a first year associate, started working with him. And he has really sponsored the bulk of my pro bono work. And by sponsor, I mean like supervise me. And over time, the case, for example, that I mentioned earlier for PETA, we ended up being a pretty big team. It was me, 2 junior associates, a senior associate, a junior partner, and a senior partner. And thankfully, I think they've just had a very nice balance of like letting me feel like this is my case, and like it's kind of like a joke of like, it's your case. So at the end of the day, like we'll discuss our options, but it's up to you. But also what Melissa was talking about, like I feel very like confident and supported with everything that we do, because literally I can, draft an email to opposing counsel and have somebody sign off on it or talk through it with me and stuff like that. So I've really liked that. That just suits my my personality, sort of in terms of the way that like I kind of want to take things step by step and make sure that I'm like feeling confident as a first year and then confident as a second year, and working my way up. But yeah, no, that's all I would add on that.
Thank you. Thank you all. And getting into a bit of the specifics, and I know you're all attorneys, so nothing will be won't be pry at all. Just I want to know, in terms of the work that you do, what are some common misconceptions about what you do? If you could, if there have been any, specifically, of course, if we're talking about animal law, what are some misconceptions that others have about what you do, if any? And please feel, I'm not sure, does anyone have any initial thoughts or no, pretty clear? People pretty much well, that's good. Isabella?
Just that we don't just advocate for chickens. We actually advocate
Yeah.
for all farmed animals. But our founder, Aline, actually had like a really noble kind of inspiration behind the name, which is that it's really interesting. Often when I tell people where I work, there'll be like a moment of kind of unintentional comedy or like an idea that it's funny. And then when you kind of drill down into it, they're sort of unable to justify that initial impulse or reaction. And when I've thought about it, I think that it's because we have to make the chicken comedic. Because if we think about what we're doing to 8 billion sentient animals every year that are functionally the same as a dog or cat, it would be too tragic, too overwhelming. So instead, we have to kind of make it something that's funny. And so I really admire that Aline has chosen to kind of forefront our mission and to remind people, no, these are animals that are worthy of love and respect and consideration and basic welfare requirements too. So I think sometimes the name throws people off, but I think in a way that creates really productive conversations. So I'm really thankful that we're called what we are.
Beautifully said. Thank you. Well, then, what I would love to hear more about then is so two things. What are some of the challenges of your work, and what are some of the most rewarding moments of your work? So, starting with Tené.
In terms of what's challenging, I would say, so I mentioned earlier that we do have at Latham and there's no cap on pro bono, there's no like official limit, it all counts towards your bonus, which is great. But that being said, you obviously do want to balance your paying client work with your pro bono work. And that can be difficult because I find that I'm less inclined, let's say I'm working on $1.5 billion like securities, it's a lot easier for a case like that when I have a really busy week to, tell another supervisor, hey, I need to, have this filing on this, I feel less inclined to do that sometimes with my pro bono work. I sort of feel like it's definitely a balance. Um, and that being said, I think, obviously this is going to vary firm to firm, but that work is still taken seriously. And that type of balancing act is something that you have to do even with paying work because there's just a lot of like personalities and things like that at firms where everybody wants to think that their case is like your top priority and you're constantly trying to, balance your caseload and stuff. That being said, over the course of like a year, I've always been able to find a good balance. And it actually sort of suits me. I like having periods of like being intensely busy. And like we had that, for example, with the PETA case where we started, as soon as we filed, Wyoming is like a very fast moving docket. And so it was like immediately like straight discovery, planning depots while preparing for mediation, blah, blah, all of this stuff. So I think that's sort of the biggest challenge for me.
Thank you. And Allison, what about you?
I think the biggest challenge for me is just sort of the legal climate right now. It feels like um, we are working in a very difficult time where sometimes you're kind of like, okay, like, can I use this tool to achieve this? And then it's kind of like, well, no, maybe that's not a good idea because if we go down that road, X will happen. And I think it has never been easy to advocate for animals, but I think this is a particularly challenging time just given the legal and political climate that we're within. So I think the challenging part is just seeing sort of all of these things that would be potential legal avenues and then kind of having to think through like 10 steps down the road of like, well, if we do that, what's going to happen there? And then how do we work around this and that? But I think it can be really rewarding to sort of identify different legal avenues where maybe you are forced to be a little bit more creative, but you can still make progress despite sort of obstacles.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And Melissa?
Yeah, I agree. And I think this also goes to your earlier question, which I didn't have an answer for, about, what are misconceptions, not misconceptions about me or my work, but about animal work in general, is that you feel like, oh, I have to use, like statutes I learned about in animal law to advocate for animals. And that's not true. I think Isabella mentioned this also, but if you're interested in animal law, you should take a corporations class because you might be filing a securities lawsuit. You should definitely take Fed courts and admin, but like you should take those classes that seem like, who knows, maybe trust in estates. I mean, there might be like other sort of like topic areas that could be helpful for animals that are not going to be your typical statutes that people think of, like the Animal Welfare Act, which, you might end up using and you want in your toolkit. And it's especially helpful when when it feels like other avenues are not necessarily available. So I'm sorry. You asked another question, and I'm answering
Yeah,
your
your
prior
most
one. But
challenges and the rewarding moments of your work.
yeah, yeah. I mean, the challenges are, that it is that there are not that many, directly helpful, relevant statutes, especially if we're interested in farm animal protection. And so that's a challenge, and you got to think creatively. And it is, but on the other hand, it's very rewarding when you get a win. So I've been working on a bunch of cases defending statutes that are laws that my organization helped get passed along with other organizations. And yeah, we got a good ruling in a district court recently, and I had written a lot of the briefs, so that was very exciting to see. And, especially exciting when you see that the court is like quoting a case that your brief was the only one that mentioned this case. And so you're like, oh, I contributed to this outcome, and it feels really great. Um, there's also appeals, so who knows, maybe you'll get to feel great every step of the way. um, but it's nice to feel like, if not for me being here, maybe the outcome would have been different, and I personally contributed to getting this good outcome for animals.
Absolutely. And I'm loving hearing the wins. By the way, Tanae, I know you mentioned PETA as well, so it's so great. So Isabella, yes.
Oh, I was just going to jump in. If you are a law student right now interested in helping animals, take administrative law. It's all changing really quickly right now, but if you want to help the most amount of animals at one time, the only way you can do that is through changing the federal government, through understanding the FDA and USDA and the Administrative Procedure Act and public comments and notice and comment rulemaking. And if I had taken administrative law, that would have saved me a huge amount of reading and trying to puzzle through a really complex subject this year. So highly encourage you to take administrative law if you have any interest in farmed animal welfare.
Thank you so much. And that actually leads to a question that was presented by or posited by Professor Stoltz. So we'll transition a bit into the Q&A so we can have some time for that. So first of all, Professor Stoltz said she's proud of all of you, former students. She said, Tanae, though, I'm sorry I didn't have the privilege of teaching you too. So love for you there as well, Tanae. So a question from Professor Still on the subject. Isabella, thank you for starting us off with that. Which class in law school did you not take but would have been helpful for the work that you are doing now? And Isabella, did you have another class that you wanted to mention before we continue down?
No, I think animal law if you have it, but really maybe property law, environmental law, administrative law. I think those are the areas that I have found have impacted the work I've done the most thus far.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And Melissa, how about you?
I mean, most of them I took, but not everyone who's interested in animals took. So definitely take corporations. You will not think that you need to. It's super helpful. I did take Fed courts. That was super helpful. Admin I took, super helpful. Leg is a nice intro. I don't know if they're still doing that, but it's take the full admin class. That's like not enough.
And they
um,
definitely are at Harvard. That's for sure. Like, right.
but I didn't take environmental law actually, and it didn't fit with my schedule. And I wish I had, because that is also an area that is pretty complex and annoying to teach yourself.
Thank
Oh,
you
I will
so
add, I
much.
took the food law class. I don't know if they're still doing that. I took the food law clinic too, but there was like an accompanying class that was also really helpful.
Yes, we have that as well still. Thank you. Allison?
I am a little bit stumped on this one because I feel like there's just different things that'll pop up sometimes where I'm like, oh, I wish this had been a slightly bigger feature in this class that I took. Like it'll be something that's like related to admin law, but I feel like we didn't dive into all that well. So I think maybe just not only take these classes, but make sure you are putting in the time to really understand and process like what you're learning in all of your classes. Because I feel like every once in a while I'll come across something where it's like, oh, like I did take admin law, but I feel like this was a week where I was working on X, Y, and Z clinic project and I just kind of like wasn't keeping up as well with the readings. So I guess for me it's less of a, is there any class you didn't take that you wish you had, and just more of a make sure you are processing and fully taking advantage of every aspect of your classes.
Thank you. Tanae, did you have any thoughts on this?
No, I mean, it's hard because I think sort of going back to what I was saying earlier, that like really every class has something to do with animal law, if that's sort of your mindset. So there's not really anything that comes to mind that's obvious, but I think maybe the best tip I can give are the classes that I took that I do think were really helpful. One was like an advanced legal research seminar that I think I took in my third year. That's just been really like, it was the first time I like actually really listened to them when they were explaining like connectors and I don't know what, like exclamation mark at the end and all of these very useful things. So that I would definitely recommend. And I also, I took like a series of First Amendment seminars, and I think that any class like that that's very like almost philosophical of like how like designing arguments and like crafting persuasive writing, all of those types of things have been really useful. Obviously, I also like literally applied it in a First Amendment way, but I think reading like very persuasive First Amendment, whether it's like case law or opinions or whatever, that was really helpful for me. So if there's any type of sort of more almost like philosophical area that you're interested in, and it gives you the opportunity to write and design arguments and that type of thing, I would recommend it.
Thank you so much. In our final few minutes, there are a couple of questions from some audience members. Thank you all so much, panelists, and as well as the audience members for submitting these questions. So the first question will go to Isabella and Alysson, and it's, so can you all please comment on what kind of non-law work you think would be most helpful to improving the world for animals? To add context, Katya says they are a political science PhD and they have been working in international health policy and are looking to switch careers to work in animal rights and animal welfare. So Isabella or Alysson, if you all have thoughts on that.
Sure, just very briefly, I think you're extremely well positioned to make policy protecting against future zoonotic pandemics. I think we're seeing it right now with the phenomenon with egg prices and avian flu. That's fundamentally a consequence of our current industrial farming system. And if you can make people aware of that, you have a huge opportunity to improve conditions for animals as well. At a more secondary level, in a way that might be less suited to your PhD specifically, but just speaking broadly, I think working on alternative meat sources and lab grown meat is a huge frontier for improving farmed animal welfare. And if you're able to do that, you'd be making a huge difference. Meat and dairy alternatives in general have come a long way. And I think once they're able to undercut the market with traditional meat and dairy, we're going to see a massive reduction in animal suffering.
Thank you. Did you have any thoughts on the subject, Alysson, or?
I feel like Isabella did a great job handling that one. I will just sort of reiterate that so much of our legal work does rely on sort of policy research or scientific research that someone else has done and that you can then point to and say, like, this is why this is really important. So I will just encourage you to use your degree to contribute to.
Thank you so much. And our final question is for Melissa and Tené. So Amelia asked, as far as choice of clients for animal law practice, are there more job opportunities if someone is interested in representing corporate interests, or are there more issues representing animal rights groups? To add a bit of context, they say, I know we are trained in law school to be impartial and all clients deserve representation, but I'm not sure I'd be able to do work for the corporate clients who are factory farms.
I'm not exactly sure how to answer that other than when I was at a law firm, I definitely told the firm that there were certain clients I didn't want to work for, and they were totally fine with that. Um, Not the only person, I'm sure, who had some kind of issue because they and felt like they could not adequately represent the interests of that client. And I never encountered a problem where I had to represent a client that I didn't think I could, you know, zealously represent in court. I mean, at my current job, I only have one client, which is the, Humane World slash formerly the Humane Society of the United States. So, I'm, uh, I would guess that, what Tené can comment about how, sometimes you can work at a law firm and an animal group as your client. But I think those are generally pro bono, which means probably a little bit harder to get those cases.
Yeah, I think my experience has been similar to Melissa. It's only come up once that there was a case that at this point, people know me as like the animal, whatever, and so it wasn't a big shock when I requested to. I politely declined to assist on that team, and that was fine. I think, yeah, nothing really more to add on that. I mean, I guess the practice group that you go into, you can sort of set yourself up to avoid those types of conflicts. Like if you work at a firm and you go into maybe I don't know very much about this, but like ELR, which I think is like environmental land type, like that group, you would probably more often come up on like moral conflicts for yourself. And then there might be other groups that are, let's call it like a little bit more, something that either you feel quite strongly about, or let's just call it like morally neutral. Maybe if you're doing like contract work or securities or something like that. It totally depends. But I would say I tried a lot of different practice groups, even though I was pretty sure that I wanted to do complex commercial litigation. And I definitely recommend doing that because I'm glad that I tried, an IPO in capital markets and tried some tech stuff and tried, So I think if you do that, you'll sort of find where you feel most comfortable. And that's sort of my recommendation for that.
Thank you so much. Thank you all. And as we wrap, final question for all of you. If you could just share one piece of advice to your law school self, what would it be? So it doesn't have to be specifically about animal law. If it's as simple as calm down, it'll be okay. That's just as fine as well. But however you want to take the question, starting with Melissa, if you could share one piece of advice to your law school self, what would it be?
This is fine. For those who are not, HLS, obviously, we have an honors pass, high honors, all kinds of complex. Pass is fine. No one looks at your grades. After you get your first job, no one cares.
Thank you. And Isabella?
I think I'd just say that the pain of avoidance is greater than the pain of truly engaging.
Thank you so much. Wow. Tanae.
I would say learn a lot about personal finance. I think that it's just a reality of the world that like people need money to live and people need to save money and people need to retire and all of these things. And I think the more knowledgeable you are about how you're how you're designing your life, how you're setting yourself up, like all of those things are worth thinking about and learning about so that in the future you have the opportunities that you want, you don't feel constricted, you are able to do the things that you really want to do. And I think for me, like sitting down and really thinking for myself and like my attitudes towards money or how I grew up and all of these things, it's been really helpful. And I think if you ignore those things, it can be harder later on to not be able to afford to do the types of things you want to do or take the types of jobs you want to take and all of that. So maybe that's a piece of advice I would give.
Thank you. And Allison.
I would say be intentional and be engaged and really take advantage of all the opportunities you have because law school is only 3 years and it kind of goes by really, really quickly and all of a sudden it's gone. But then also be kind to yourself at the same time. I think it's sort of this infinite struggle to balance sort of knowing that you only have 3 years and knowing that you have these incredible opportunities and wanting to make the most of them, but then also not putting too much pressure on yourself and kind of being kind to yourself in those weeks where you feel like you're sort of not doing everything perfectly. So finding a healthy balance of sort of making sure you're taking advantage of all the opportunities in front of you, but then also being kind to yourself and understanding when you kind of need to take a step back.
Thank you. Incredible advice from all of our panelists. Would you all please join me in thanking our panelists so much for being here with us? This was such a fantastic opportunity and just a great session. And so thank you all so much again for taking the time in your busy schedules to connect with future, hopefully future animal law lawyers. So again, thank you. Thank you so much. For everyone else, we have one more day of programming tomorrow for Animal Law Week. This will be our whistleblower event where we'll have Craig Watts, incredible Craig Watts and Amanda Hitt talking to us. And so please stay tuned. Additionally, if you are interested in joining our newsletter, that will be in the chat right now. And so, again, thank you all so much. And again, our panelists, thank you. And I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of your day.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Thank you so much.